everybody. It's not Friday. What am I doing here? Oh, we're doing the witching hours. Good evening, my friends. I'm so happy to see some of you are in here already. Just a reminder, I'm not doing any readings this evening. We're just doing some talking with a special guest. As always, I'm here with my co-host, Giant of the Frost, and this evening we have a special guest, psychic medium Joe Cunningham, one of my friends from my medium classes. He's going to talk to us about vampires. What? Yay.
It'll be interesting.
Yes.
Interesting night ahead.
So we got dyslexic witches here, Roseflower. Hope you guys are doing great this evening. All right.
So we've been able to keep this semi-regular. So everybody, we've been getting our episodes out. So we're on to the next.
Yeah.
We're on to the next one.
Monthly so far.
Yeah, that's not bad.
All right. So, tonight, as usual, we need to start out with the news.
The news.
What kind of weird stuff do you have for us this evening?
Well, feel free in chat. If you have me and Medium Jenny were talking earlier about if we need a name for the news segment. If we need a name for the news segment
Yeah, what
or
can we
not.
call it?
Should we just call it the news, or could we? So we're gonna leave it up to you guys to kind of throw out
Yes.
some
Get
ideas.
get creative.
If you,
Tell
if
us,
you if you think there's something we should call it,
what should we call the news segment?
any weird news, spooky news,
Paranormal news,
paranormal news,
woo woo news.
any of the woo news. And so just to give us something to do, we can always come up with something. But tonight's news, I have about, I think, 4 stories. The first one has a little bit, I guess, of a slight connection to some of the things we might talk about tonight. And that is there been another sighting of the chupacabra?
What?
Um, Argentina. A series of mysterious cattle mutilations on a farm in Argentina have given rise to concerns that a chupacabra could be behind the unsettling slayings, according to a local media report. And there's a video, like local news story, that went out to interview. The curious case centers around farmer Hugo Valenzuela's property near the city of Esquina. In 3 separate incidents over the last 2 months, he has found cows that were killed in a peculiar fashion, wherein their tongues, udders, and reproductive organs were removed with an eerie level of precision.
Ew.
So, some cattle mutilation. There's no trace of bleeding, not even traces that indicate that the animal could have crawled or rammed. Um, a quote from the farmer: "When it happens once and even twice, you take it as something curious or anecdotal. However, that initial bewilderment has given way to anger as he is now hoping for answers after losing a third cow in 2 months and suffering a significant financial blow as a result."
Mm.
While seasoned cattle mutation researchers have suggested some kind of government conspiracy behind the phenomenon, the farmer and other residents of the area pointed the finger at a decidedly different suspect, the infamous chupacabra.
Chupacabra.
Their reasoning is that a human would not attack a cow in the manner in which Venezuela's cattle were killed, with only some select organs removed. The notorious blood-sucking cryptid was also blamed for a similar series of slayings in neighboring Chile last year.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
Interesting. Uh,
Blood sucking critters. That's what we're here to talk about.
yeah, that's the connection I drew there. And cattle mutilations, I've heard of a lot of cattle mutilations connected to aliens,
Yeah.
the UFOs, unidentified
Mhm.
flying objects.
Yeah.
So in here, it's being connected to chupacabra. So we'll see
Mm.
if you guys have anything, any
Cryptids.
experiences or stories about the chupacabra or
Cryptids are
cryptids. Feel
very
free to
interesting subject
let us
matter.
know in the chat.
I just wanted to point out also that we got some contributions to the 30-minute tarot video giveaway from Sylvie and Little Wing already. Good job, ladies. And thank you. Whoever wins will also thank you. What's the next story?
Well, here's another connection maybe to some of the stuff we talked tonight. According to an article on Newsweek, I'm looking at the story. I titled it "Alive or Dead or Undead." An Indian man who had been
Is this a
declared
zombie
dead.
story?
An Indian
Yes.
man who had been declared dead and placed in a morgue freezer on Friday was discovered alive by his family the following day.
Ah,
Uh, Shrikesh Kumar, 45, was in critical condition after he was hit by a motorcycle in Mordabad. The agents, the press there reported. Upon our arrival at a private medical facility, he was declared dead and transported to a government hospital. Uh, um, he was declared dead, put in the freezer, and the next day, his family came in to identify the body, and he was alive.
hmm. Naked and cold.
Um, when a police team and his family came over to initiate the paperwork for the autopsy, he was found alive, and he said it was nothing short of a miracle. The Times of India reported a woman identified as Shrikesh Kumar's sister-in-law, and she spoke about the mistaken death in the video. There's a video online that we can link to.
Wow.
Um, and they're bringing in medical experts to try to figure out
Figure it out.
what happened and how they got it wrong. Because they said when he arrived at the hospital, there were absolutely no signs of life, no heartbeat, no
Yeah.
anything like
Yeah. Hmm.
that.
Man, people
Yeah,
make mistakes.
it happens.
That's a
Well,
terrible mistake to make.
that's why they used to put the bell in the coffins, right?
Yeah.
Just in
Ding
case.
a ling a ling.
Hey,
I'm not dead
you
yet.
make yeah. um, from Fox News, we have a story of pandemic causing less lightning.
What?
Uh, Scientists have theorized
This
that
one,
COVID
the
19.
the title of this one just made my brain hurt a little
Yeah,
bit. I'm not. Where's
yeah.
this going?
Scientists have theorized that COVID-19 lockdowns may have helped decrease the amount of lightning produced in the atmosphere in the year 2020,
Hmm.
according to a recent study. A study presented at the fall meeting of the American Geophysical Union, all you members know it as the AGU, analyzed atmospheric factors that may have contributed to reductions of 10 to 20%, depending on how lightning is counted. The study focused on aerosol optical depth, which measures particles produced by burning fossil fuels. These particles can act to accelerate and enhance the collection of water vapor in cloud formation. More particles absorb more moisture, limiting the amount of rain and creating small ice crystals that collide in the cloud and build up the charges that typically create lightning. The study compared lightning activity and aerosol levels between March and May of 2020. And so they're saying that the reduction of aerosols appears to have limited linked effects. And so that the less aerosols in the atmosphere due to people staying indoors more have actually changed the weather.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense now.
I mean, we saw that. I mean, we saw pictures, right, of like lesser amounts of smog and stuff like that in
Hmm.
cities. People being able to see mountains where they couldn't see
Yeah.
mountains before.
Animals where they
But
hadn't seen them in a long time.
but
Yeah.
I guess maybe even more vast, climate or weather change. I
Yeah.
mean, reducing lightning by 20%, I imagine, has to have some kind of possible effect if that were to be
Uh-huh.
done over a long period of time.
Mm.
And then
Interesting.
the last story for tonight is, are fortune cookies for real? A North Carolina
Are they really
veteran.
cookies or did they have correct
Are they
fortunes?
really fortune cookies? Right? Are they really fortune cookies? A
Are
North
they
Carolina
really
veteran
cookies?
turned a restaurant meal into a Mega Millions jackpot after he used the numbers
Oh, the
from his
numbers.
fortune cookie to win a
What?
$4 million prize. He used his
Wow.
fortune cookie numbers, went and bought a lottery ticket, hit the jackpot, took
That's
the cash
crazy.
payout, and got $2.8 million.
Wow.
Right down south in North Carolina, U.S. Army veteran. Probably couldn't happen to. Seemed like it happened to a decent guy. So
Yeah. Wow.
maybe we shouldn't just throw away the fortune as quickly as I do. I don't know. Maybe we need to play the numbers.
Yeah. That's crazy. I bet
And
that's
that's the weird, spooky
yeah.
witching hours news tonight.
Tell us what should we call the news? Hey Sylvie, I'm good. How are you? Thanks for donating to the tarot video giveaway.
All right, so
Yes.
I want to introduce our guest tonight,
Joe.
Joe Cunningham. So the youngest of three sons, Joe has had contact with spirits off and on since he was a child, but until the pandemic, never studied mediumship with anyone. On a whim, he took a class with medium Cindy Keza and has
Hmm.
continued working with her since August 2020. Joe worked as an archaeologist in New England and New Mexico, the latter with the National Park Service, before changing careers to do software development. He has had a long interest in all things paranormal. He also is a moderator for three music streams on Twitch: Risky Biscuit Band, Roxy Gun Project, and Mandy Prater. Welcome to the Witching Hours,
Yay,
Joe Cunningham.
Joe.
Thank you so much for having me on. This will be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, we're looking forward to our discussion tonight. Um, so, looking at the bio, as me and
Uh,
Medium Jenny have talked
Thank you
about
for
this
the
for a little while.
follow.
I think the first place I wanted to start tonight is, as I'm sure our chat is learning, I'm a history buff, a history guy. That's what I went. That's what I have my degrees on the wall for, and I've always been super interested in archaeology. So, how did you get into the field of archaeology?
Yeah, so I also have always had a fascination with history. Um, Studied, you know, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, all that kind of classical stuff. Loved learning about different mythologies, Norse mythology and that kind of thing. And when I was younger, I got into like Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons and that kind of thing. Didn't really consider it much in terms of like a career until freshman year in college. I took a intro to anthropology class. At the time, I was actually a biophysics major, um, so I came in as a planning on doing much more kind of you know hard science. And as soon as I took that class, I was like, nope, switching majors.
Yeah, you're hooked.
The guy was hooked, and
Yep.
so I went to University of Connecticut for undergrad, and went to Washington State University for graduate school for my master's, and worked with the National Park Service in New Mexico, but also before that had worked in Connecticut doing what's called contract archaeology. Um, and basically there's certain different laws around national laws as well as local laws where when you do things like road projects, you have to make sure that you're not making cutting through cultural resources and digging up stuff, and we would work on those kinds of projects often with this contract archaeology. So that's where most of my work in New England was doing contract archaeology.
Okay, that actually brings up. So you were doing some archaeology for like when they would go through to clear roads and stuff like that. Did you did you happen to come across any interesting cases there? I know a lot of times they find Native American remains, stuff like that. Were you part anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm in um, southeastern Connecticut. I mean, we'll probably get to the slides eventually, but I don't know if how much people know about this area, but um, one of the biggest casinos on the East Coast was built by the Pequot tribe, and the Pequots are based right outside of, well, between Norwich and New London. Um, and they were doing a lot of work on their reservation, and we actually worked with them a lot. Um, and one of the finds that actually I had worked on the site quite a bit was a 17th century Pequot fort
Oh, wow.
that had
Mm.
never been found before, and is now preserved and part of they basically built a museum over the top of that site.
That's cool.
And I was one of the first people to work on that particular site. We also worked, I remember working along the shoreline in the winter on what's basically a lot of seasonal cottages. They were putting in a sewer system so that those could be used year round. And we were working in like 2-degree weather.
Yuck.
It
Oh,
was
that
horrible.
sounds like fun. Yeah.
It
Yeah,
was
wind chills into like the -20s.
it was 18
Uh,
degrees here this past week, and I thought my
oh,
eyeballs were gonna freeze, so no thank
Yeah.
you.
that
And
that
that's
that
and
that was the worst experience ever. But we
that's when
found
being a historian and staying inside and reading old
stay
books
inside, right? Yeah,
pays off.
reading old
It
books.
Yeah.
pays off.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember we were taking shifts because it was too cold. So we had our like a suburban, like an old '70s suburban as a kind of our crew truck. And it was just running the whole time with the heat on, and people would patrol in and out. But we found a bunch of what are called shell middens, which is basically a lot of mostly clams and mussels, and it's basically like a dump, but it's like really thick. Um, this particular area was the center of what was called the wampum trade. Um, so the clams and the type of clams that were found here were turned into beads,
Mhm.
and that was then used as trade goods
Yeah.
by the English and the French to trade with inland natives for beaver pelts, which then went back to Europe as because there was a huge like fashionable beaver pelt thing with hats and
Oh, yeah.
capes and everything else. So it was a huge economic thing.
Beaver capes, goodness
Yeah,
gracious.
right. So that was interesting, but probably the most like unique thing I found was actually when I was working in New Mexico. Um, I was working at a place called Pecos National Monument, which in and of itself is a really fascinating place. It's the site of a Civil War battle
Mm,
that happened in New Mexico. Like
wow.
people don't think that the
Yeah.
Civil War went that far out. Um, but what I found was and this was like in a really remote part of the park. We were in the middle of kind of the uplands as it's going into the mountains. And I found the midshaft fragment of what's called a Folsom point. And a Folsom point, um, based on dating, is about 9,000 years old. And it was just sitting
Wow.
underground.
That's
Wow.
crazy.
And so up until then, they didn't have any evidence of what that is called a Paleo Indian occupation in that part of the state of New Mexico until that particular find.
Until you found it
Until
just
I
laying
found
on the
it.
ground.
I just found it. And
Ain't
to kind of
wondered.
connect it back to kind of psychic stuff. I remember like seeing it and going, okay, that just looks like because we would find like flake stone like bits, and it just kind of looked like a white piece of a good sized piece of flake stone. It didn't look like a point at all. But I'm like, there's something important about that. And when I picked it up, I knew exactly what it was because I was fascinated by the Paleo Indian uh, stone tool
Yeah.
technologies, and had always been like drawing wholesome points
Wow.
since I learned about them, and I was like, holy crap!
And then there was one just right
And then
there.
there's one, yeah,
Mhm.
It was like
right,
it was meant for you to find it.
yes,
Yeah. That's really cool.
and
Interesting.
then
So do we
ki-
know what kind of who that ended up being attached to? What groups of people or
well, unfortunately, the the Paleo-Indian, there isn't a ton of sites, um, and it's mostly identified by their particular type of stone technology,
Hmm.
and there's mostly we just would find like hunting camps and that kind of thing. But that park is right on the edge of the Great Plains, and the that particular Paleo-Indian type of stone spear point, it's essentially a spear point, um, was often found in massive hunts,
Hmm.
things like woolly mammoth, bison hunts,
Wow.
those kinds
Mm.
of things. So um, unfortunately, it's spotty and it's hard to find
Hmm.
those kinds of sites. So they're pretty rare.
Yeah, because the stone things would pretty much be the only things left
Mm.
of the things that
Yeah,
they
for sure.
used.
Yeah, or the bones.
Yeah.
One of the things that tends to survive is when bones are cooked or burnt. Sometimes uncooked bones disintegrate, of course. Um, but I know in some cases what seemed to be their method of hunting was they would identify, say, a box canyon, which is basically, you can kind of think of it like a shoebox with one side like kind of pulled
Hmm.
down, and they would drive the animals into that box canyon
Trap them.
as and trap them, and
Yeah.
basically like the stampede would be enough that the ones at the front would get like squashed and killed and
Oh,
couldn't
wow.
like get around.
Mm.
And they found like completely intact like bison, like that had no evidence of any butchering, but those were the ones at the front.
Those are the squished ones.
those were the squished
Those were
guys.
the unlucky
The
ones
ones
to
at
go
the
in first.
yeah, the ones at the back were all cut up and had lots of evidence of butchering and that kind
Wow,
of thing. So
that's
yeah.
pretty neat. Well,
Yeah,
Roseflower
yeah, and
said 9,000 years. Wow. And Wanderer
yeah,
and Foombi both contributed to the tarot video giveaway. Thank you guys.
yeah. And Roseflower with the 9,000 years, 9,000 years old. It, I think that's a fascinating topic itself. Is not in the Americas, of course. Like we keep going further and further back. Like how
Hmm.
long
Right.
have humans been in the in the Americas, and that number keeps getting pushed back, just like the human age itself keeps getting, every, I think every couple months, like the age of humans,
Hmm.
goes
Yeah.
back another, 500,000 years or whatever. So it'll be, fascinating topic in and of itself.
All right. Well, I think it's time to get into the subject at hand.
Okay.
Where do the vampires come into the archaeology? What the hell?
What the hell? Exactly. So what I'll be talking about uh, tonight, for the most part, is a particular folk belief in New England. So specifically, there's a lot of evidence in Rhode Island and Connecticut. Some also evidence in New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont. It seems to have skipped Massachusetts for some reason. Um, of people doing what we would consider vampire-y type of like ritual, not ritual, but killings, I guess you could call it.
Hmm.
So I just want
Mm.
to read a few things. So this is a description from 1799, and I just want you guys to kind of tell me what this brings to mind. The emaciated figure strikes one with terror, the forehead covered with drops of sweat, the cheeks painted with a livid crimson, the eyes sunk, the little fat that raised them in their orbits entirely wasted, the pulse quick and tremulous, the nails long, bending over the ends of the fingers, the palms of the hand dry and painfully hot to the touch, the breath offensive, quick, and laborious, and the cough so incessant as to scarce allow the wretched sufferer time to tell his complaints.
Hmm. It's creepy.
So That's a clinical description from 1799 of a disease they called consumption.
Oh yeah.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
We know consumption today as tuberculosis.
Yep.
So what I'll be talking about are cases essentially of people having tuberculosis and people in their societies, because they had no other means of protecting themselves, doing kind of what we would consider wretched activities involving the body.
Mm.
They never actually called what they were doing, protecting themselves from vampires. They never used that term. People from the cities would write that, but the actual people this almost always happened in rural areas, in farming communities. They never actually used that term themselves.
Okay. And so this is mostly happening in rural areas for the well, I guess you said, not
Yeah,
Massachusetts. So it's happening in Boston.
it's definitely it's all of the descriptions that we have, the historical newspaper accounts are in rural communities, farming communities. Um, Up until the Civil War, consumption was the biggest killer of people in the U.S.
Yeah.
25% of the people that died from consumption.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Mm.
So,
Yeah,
and
it's no joke.
embalming, as we know it, didn't start until the Civil War, and the only reason it started was because they were trying to preserve the bodies from the battlefields and bring them back home. But for the most part, people were buried in a plot behind their house.
Hmm.
If you're a farmer out in wherever, so they usually had like little family plots. So that's kind of the stage of what we're talking about. Um, there are some connections to European concepts of vampires that we'll get into, but for the most part, this is kind of a not exactly a unique thing, but it's pretty localized to southern New England for the most part.
Hmm. Very interesting. Excited
Very
to see
interesting.
the path we're going down here.
Yes.
Mhm.
All right.
And
So
this is very interesting because I lived in Rhode Island for 3 years and I never saw a vampire, so I'm curious.
right.
So I have been up that way. So I'm curious to see where this leads us here.
Yeah.
Sure. So Jenny, yeah, I don't know if you want to share the first map,
Yes. Let me
just
get
so
it
people can
ready
kind of,
here.
who aren't familiar with the area, can be, you
Mm.
know.
All right. Is it showing up okay, Frost Giant?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So you can see, New York in the lower left and Boston in the upper right. And the area we're talking about has kind of I use the Google Maps, of course, because who wouldn't? They're only about 30 miles apart. And where I grew up is another 30 miles to the east. And I had never heard any of these stories. So that just kind of tells you the localization. Um, and we had like, all kinds of crazy stories growing up. We had like an abandoned house that we called the Warlock's house in my hometown. And there's a state park only about 5 miles from me called Devil's Hop Yard,
Mm.
where supposedly the devil uh, appeared as like kind of a kangaroo looking thing, and was hopping around. But
Oh, that's literally the
Well,
devil's
and
hopping. Like it was
uh,
hopping around.
it was hopping, yeah.
Weird.
But what's interesting is there was also a person who lived there called Dibble, and he actually grew hops. So I
That's
mean,
what I was thinking. It had something to do with
the truth
beer.
is it was, a corruption of Dibble's
Mhm.
hop yard.
So
So
Dibble was the
yeah,
devil, very
yeah,
Yeah.
growing the hops, getting everybody drunk.
right.
Yeah. That's, yeah, that's very interesting. Uh,
All right.
how folklore and yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly
it
how
all
Yeah,
how
yeah,
fits
things
yeah.
together.
change.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about, I mean, I think we'll kind of talk a little bit about is how um our current concept of vampires, of course, is has been crafted through the kind of Victorian lens,
Hmm.
and specifically Bram Stoker,
Yep.
and
Mhm.
everything that came after that. Um, if you think of even the evolution in pop culture from, say, Bela Lugosi to Twilight,
Hmm.
the change of our kind of the iconic
Iconography.
nature,
Yeah.
yeah, of vampires has shifted even in just that short of a time frame.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And it's interesting, Joe, even just looking at this from a regional point of view, everything is just kind of American, but as a Southerner who was a transplant to New England for a while, there is there's a different feel
Mhm.
to the local. I know that Halloween when I was living in Rhode Island was just a bigger deal. It was just a little bit of a bigger deal. You could just
Right,
feel it. You could feel, Virginia's, the oldest was the oldest colony by a little bit over Massachusetts, but something there felt a little older for some reason at times.
right.
There's just a little bit of a different aura in New England that I haven't experienced anywhere else. And I think that, do you my just thinking that some of this might lend to some of this as well, and the way
Right.
folklore and stuff is crafted there.
Yeah, it's an as an area, it's not very big, but
Hmm.
what's interesting is the the kind of geography of it is very it's quite variable, and it's as an example, it would be very difficult for me to physically walk to where we're going to be talking about, even though it's only 30 miles away, because I would have to go um, up and down so many different like river valleys and hard scrabble kind of rock
Hmm.
outcrops and that kind of thing.
There is a lot of
So
rocks. A lot of rocks in New
there's a ton
England.
of rocks. Yeah, that's because of the glaciers. The glaciers dumped a lot of rocks here. And one of the things they also did was they carved north-south running valleys.
Hmm.
So going east to west here historically was a big challenge. Going north
Mhm.
to south is not as much of a challenge. So, just the fact that this is 30 miles west of where I grew up and I had never heard these stories
Yeah.
is kind of, indicative of the history of the area. Um,
Ooh.
Traveling of the
Mhm.
by storytelling would have been
right,
harder. Yeah.
right. So, um, yeah, we can get into kind of the main story that I want to talk about, so we can go to the next slide.
Okay.
And the two areas you'll see on the left, there's something called Jewett City, and then
Uh, Real quick, Joe, I don't
sure,
mean to interrupt, but I do want to let chat know if you guys have questions
Yes, please put them
for
in.
Joe, throw them in chat, and we will read them as they come in as we get pauses in the conversation here, so you
Hmm.
can get your answer
Whenever you got
questions
a
answered
question
here. So feel free to contribute,
or a
and
comment.
we'll ask those as we go along. Yep.
yeah. So let's see. Let me also open it here. Yeah. So on the left, we've got Jewett City, and then you'll see kind of down on the right, there's a highlighted thing called Gears Tree Farm. So those are two of the places that I'll be talking about.
Okay.
So they're right near each other. And then if we go to the next picture, it's kind of not the best picture, but how I got involved in this is there was a sand and gravel operation that was happening on the Gears property. Now, I I can't recall if it was on the tree farm or kind of adjacent to the tree farm, but they were using this for typical sand and gravel kind of things, construction, road maintenance, that kind of thing. And on a Friday, they ceased operations and did their thing. On a Saturday, a couple of young boys, as you can see, it's kind of a steep slope. It's about a 30-foot drop. They were um, doing what boys do,
Mm.
crazy things,
Yeah.
which is why men tend to have a shorter lifespan than women. And they were sliding down this grade. Well, they slid down. One of the boys slid down, and he happened to slide down with a couple of skulls.
Oh my god.
Oh wow. Hmm.
So
I bet he shit
they,
himself.
yeah, he was based on the story I was told. He was scared. He went back to his mom and said, "Mom, I found a skull over at the gravel pit." And she's like, "Come on," you know.
Yeah.
Mhm.
She didn't believe him. So he apparently went and brought the skull to mom.
Oh god, he like
And
picked it up, brought it
Mm.
home.
he's like, "Oh, really? Oh, you don't believe me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Here it
Well,
is.
here you go, mom." So mom,
Mhm.
of course, kind of freaked out, but did the right thing, which is she called the police because, if you find a skull, it could be a murder victim, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the police came, cordoned it off, started an investigation. The medical examiner was brought in, and they basically determined that, okay, based on the condition of these skulls, at the time there was a serial killer um, that had been incarcerated, and there were a number of his victims uh, throughout uh, New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island that they had never found, and they thought
Oh, could
they
be.
thought perhaps this could be some of his victims. But based on the condition of the skull, it was pretty obvious that they had been interred for quite a while and had seen a lot of decomposition. And so it got transferred to the state archaeologist, who was one of my professors. So this was in 1990. Um, so this is kind of dating me. Um, but
We won't
um,
talk about that part.
we won't talk about that part.
There's a little synchronicity here, just to let you know, Joe. I was in Rhode Island, so I'm not that far away from you in
Right.
1990.
Yeah, oh, that's
Oh,
so
interesting.
weird.
That's funny.
You guys were there at the same time,
Well,
probably
So,
this
yeah.
this this
saw
story
each other at the McDonald's or something.
actually ended up being in the news quite a bit, and gets trotted out every Halloween, as you can imagine.
I bet.
Well, as we get into it, you'll kind of figure out why it gets trotted out. So when he got there, he realized, okay, yeah, obviously it's he could see three different basically burial shafts. And whenever you dig in the ground, the way kind of natural deposits work, you have kind of different layers that get deposited naturally. Just, erosion, sand, that kind of thing. And when you dig into the ground, you can see that disturbance quite easily in a profile cut of a vertical cut. So it was really obvious that, okay, we've got these three um, burial shafts. Basically, they dig down whatever 4 to 6 feet, and it's they throw the dirt back in, but the dirt is all mixed up, so it doesn't look the same as the
Mhm.
surrounding dirt. So they ended up. I can't remember. Let me look at the next slides. Mm. Okay, yeah. So if we go to the next one, um, you can see how close some of these burials were to the edge. So that this is a child's burial that we're viewing, kind of looking down from, say, the feet to the head. And on the left is the drop off.
Yeah, it was like right there.
And it's right there.
Like if they would have done one more shovelful, they would have smacked right
Right.
into it. Yeah.
Right.
And so, are we in this picture? Are we seeing the soil discoloration from the coffin, or am
Correct.
I
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah. So this is both the well, this one, let's see. Let me take a look at it. It looks like we're just getting into the top of the coffin.
Okay.
So that's the other thing is when wood decomposes, it often will be a much darker stain
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's what I
than
was wondering if that's what we were looking at
Like
there. Is
the
actually seeing the
rotted
right.
wood.
decomposition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then if we go to the next uh image,
That's pretty creepy if I don't say so myself, especially when we zoom in there. I see like some peepers kind of there.
yeah. So this
Oh
I'm
man.
I'm I'm pretty sure this is one that I actually worked on. Um, so this was, if I recall correctly, a young girl, um, probably in her teens, probably in like the 14 age range, something like that. The other thing you can see is that the soil around her is kind of a buff color, and then the area um, directly near the bones is a much darker
Hmm.
Mhm.
stain.
Yes.
Not to get too grisly, but that's essentially organic matter from the body
Hmm.
that decomposed. And so sometimes it depends on the burial itself and how much water kind of is flowing through that particular area. Sometimes it won't be that n- as notable as it is in this one.
So did this
Um,
girl not have a coffin? She looks like she's just in the dirt.
no, she had a coffin.
It's just all gone.
It's hard to tell, but it's
I guess I can
what.
see a little bit on the right hand side of or by her
Yeah,
legs.
I mean,
Yeah.
you think the boards are not that thick,
Hmm.
so when we're excavating, we can find the things that tend to remain are the at least in this case the iron nails
Yeah, the nails.
that were used to hold the coffin together. The shape itself is pretty indicative. It's kind of that traditional,
Hmm.
what we think of as kind of a coffin shaped. Um, what we ended up finding uh, with record search was in about the 1750s, this particular plot of land was bought by a family called the Waltons. And it was bought specifically as a burial plot,
Mm-hmm.
as a burial ground. Um, so that if you notice in the thing, it says Walton Cemetery,
Hmm.
um,
Yes.
even though we forgot the Y. And
Maybe
don't
the
mind
Y
that,
was missing. The Y was missing.
it might have been missing from our thing. Um, so uh, that will become a little bit important as we go into the story a little bit. Um, and then if we go to the next slide, you can see the actual
There's a
uh,
lot of them. Holy
the
moly.
plan of what we found. Now um, to the top of this map, that dotted line is essentially the edge of where things were eroding. So we had a situation where
Mm.
this was a recovery effort in order to preserve these burials.
So
Wow.
all of those burials are in danger of being exposed on that side there.
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
Wow.
Um, so the ones marked JB, IB, and NB towards the top right are the ones that we'll be talking about. As it turns out, one of the skulls that had become dislodged was from the middle one, IB. Um, and that was an adult female. NB was an adolescent male, around 12 to 13.
Mm.
And JB will be the one that we'll be focusing on. But if you notice, they're all basically in kind of a similar configuration in terms of where their heads are, where their feet are.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So if we go, I think, to the next slide. Oh no, that's a different one. Well, we can go to the next slide
Okay.
actually. Um, so this is a photo of the burial for NB, which
Not
is
wood.
not wood,
Yeah.
uh,
Hmm.
brick. So they were basically they were buried in a coffin, in a wooden coffin, and then the brick uh, was added that basically as a crypt.
Okay.
Okay.
And those four stones you see behind it, the field stones, were placed over the
On
top.
top.
Um, this was actually kind of interesting in that um, we didn't. You don't normally find a brick crypt
Yeah.
from this time period,
Yeah. It's very
um,
weird.
and the time period based on other evidence that we're talking about is, we knew from the records that this was used as a burial ground from the late 1750s, and the dating of this is like 1820s to 1830s.
It's like, are they trying to keep the body from getting out?
Yeah, we didn't make any kind of
Yeah.
interpretation like that. Um, w- you ought we based on other historical burials, we would find often a crypt, but it would usually just be the field stones. So they would have like vertical field stones
Mhm.
with a kind of like a horizontal one on top, um, in addition to the normal um, coffin itself. And then if we go to the next one, you can see it's a black and white photo from a different angle of the same burial.
Okay.
Um, if you kind of focus, it might be a little hard. You might have to zoom in. This is the top of the coffin, and in the top of the coffin were these initials
Mm.
NB and 13,
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah, I can see
and
that.
they used brass tacks basically to put that in there. So
Hmm.
it took a while to figure out, but essentially this was the person's initials and their age at death.
Uh,
Okay.
like an
Okay.
Um,
identifier.
right, right.
Yeah.
And then yeah, if we go to the next slide, this is kind of a, a general, you
Is
know,
that
ha-
something that something that was typical to find the initials and all
you
that?
know,
Yeah.
it's interesting because is if I recall correctly, this was either the first colonial cemetery ever like kind of excavated or one of the first, um because there's a lot of taboos against that, of
Hmm.
course, and
Yeah.
everyone would do everything they could to avoid having to excavate this kind
Yeah.
of thing.
It's kind of interesting because I know that, in my archaeology class, I think we specifically looked at New England headstones and how they changed
Right.
over
Right.
from going from early colonial to late colonial. But yeah, I guess it's not.
There
You
would
don't have
have,
a lot of opportunity to go
yeah,
open up the graves and see
Right.
what
there would have never been
engraved
a
in there.
reason to do it, except
Yeah.
this stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
These had to be.
certainly if we talk about headstones, we do see a big transition from the earliest ones. My understanding is a lot of them are sandstone, and they're kind of in New England anyway. Um, they're very easy to cut out. They're very easy to carve. They
Hmm.
don't last.
Mm-mm.
They don't last that long
Flaking
because,
away.
yeah, they
Yeah.
they
Mhm,
disintegrate,
mhm.
and then there's a lot more slate that is used, especially in Massachusetts, where there was ample quarries for slate. In Connecticut, there was still they would use what's called brownstone, which is
Okay.
a type of sandstone. The infamous brownstones of New York and Boston
Mhm.
all come from a quarry about another 15 miles west of me, from Portland. So it's called Portland brownstone. Um, and that was a typical headstone around here
Okay.
for town cemeteries. Now you have to understand these are farmers out
Hmm.
on essentially the edge. There were no markers for this cemetery, like, at all. There was a couple of little tiny little stones that seemed to be near the headstone area. There was not what you would typically have, with the vertical headstones
Hmm.
that you see all over the place here.
So
There's tons
maybe
of
like the
little
brass tacks on the top
cemeteries,
was their way of
right?
like remembering who and how
Remembering,
old. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Marking it in some way.
I did, as far as other burials with these brass tacks. I honestly, ha- I never researched that, so I can't say that whether there's many others that have been found.
Hmm. That
I
would
do
make
know
sense
that
that they would use what they had. You know,
what
if
they
they can't
had,
have a
right,
big headstone, then they can put these tacks in there that give their initials or whatever. Yeah.
right. Um, so it, as we're looking at this, um, we don't know, like, why the hell are there? What's this bee family doing here?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
we
that's
knew
not
this was the
W.
Walton. This is the Waltons. Like,
It's not
this is
NW.
the.
Yeah.
It's not NW. It's a B. And those three at the top, there was another one that had an IB, and that was a female. And then the other one had a JB, so we knew that they were all most likely related. They were,
Hmm.
uh, placed right near each other. Um, and when they did a record search and looked to see if they could find anybody, death records or anything else, they they came up with nothing. There was no records of any bee family, um, that matched these three. There were lots of, like, bee names. There were, like, bishops and, um, uh, a few other names that I can't remember right now. Let me just grab my notes. Well, I'll get to the actual name eventually. But anyway, so that was kind of an enigma. Like that
Yeah.
was it didn't make a whole lot of a
Who are
sense to
they? Where
us,
did they come from?
right? Um, see. Okay, so yeah, if we go to the next one, you'll see a picture of, um, the JB tax.
Oh yeah.
And this ended up being, the designation for this particular individual for a long time. JB 55. So, um, this is our person of interest.
Okay.
And it is somewhat the yeah, the confounding part of this cemetery work. So if you then go to the next image, you can. This is JB's uh, interment area. He had the more traditional kind of vertical placed fieldstone crypt and the
Mhm.
horizontal crypt. As you can see, he's right on the edge of
Yeah.
this erosion. Um, yeah, and then if we go to the next slide, this one hopefully will be somewhat clear what's happening. If we go from the bottom to the top, we see his feet, his shin bones. We don't see his thigh bones. His thigh bones are in a cross configuration up by his chest,
What in the hell?
Mm.
and
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
his skull has been removed.
Wow.
Now, based on um, forensic anthropology and forensic studies, it was pretty easy for us to know that this happened after death,
Mhm.
like 5 to 10 years after death. This
What?
was this
So
the
after
this
he's been interred.
after he'd been dead. Somebody went in there, decapitated him, cut his thigh bones, also broke his chest open. The ribs were all kind of mangled, um, and placed them in this X position, kind of a not what we consider a traditional kind of skull and crossbones, but it was across the chest.
Okay.
The other thing is that the head was placed so that it faced west. Now
Weird.
the Christian belief was to have the top of the head facing west and the feet facing east, so that on the last day when Jesus comes back, he's supposed to come back at sunrise, and you would raise up from the dead to see him in the east.
Mm.
So the fact that this guy's skull has been decapitated and placed facing west is somewhat interesting.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, you know, my professor Nicholas Bellantoni, the state archaeologist, he was he also taught us human osteology, which is the study of the human skeletal structure. So one of the classes I took with him was on human osteology, actually after this cemetery excavation. But so he was well versed in all of the anatomy of skeletons and everything else. And obviously, we've never seen this before, and
Yeah.
as far as I know, we it's never been found since. Um, we didn't know what the heck
Mm.
what to make of it.
Yeah.
We're like,
Yeah,
So
what
where do we go
weird.
from here?
was somebody breaking into this for some reason, to like just rearrange stuff? Was it some kind of weird, like, you know had they been buried with something that some kind of tomb robber would go in there and just kind of mess around with stuff?
Yeah, because you would think of, grave robber, more than likely would have been going into graves where they thought there was, was some kind of goods they could get. But
Right.
here you're talking about possible like rural farmers, and then
Yeah,
also the mutilation of the of the corpse. So
right,
interesting.
right. Yeah. So none of the other burials had anything other than we found a few with basically the shroud pins that held the linen shroud um, closed when they were buried. but they didn't have anything else. So we didn't have any reason to believe that JB-55 would have been buried with, like, I don't know, an emerald necklace or something.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
plus he was in rural Connecticut,
Mhm.
which is like, if you're a farmer, that's a hard ass life, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
We just said there was a lot of rocks.
there's you can't put a stone into the ground or a shovel into the ground without hitting a rock.
Yeah.
As an aside, when I was working for this contracting firm, we would use, kind of regular shovels, and we got good enough at excavating that we could create a flat, level surface with regular round shovels. Um, but when we were out digging, we would run into so many rocks, we would run through shovels, like 3 shovels in a digging season each
Wow.
person. Like they weren't pointed anymore. They actually had an indentation where we
All
just
the
wore
rocks.
down all of the metal from hitting all the damn rocks.
Wow.
Hmm.
And we had to get those. We couldn't use the wooden shovel handles because those would break too easily. So we had to use like the kind of like um, I don't know what they are, some kind of polymer or something. That was the only way that they would survive longer than like 2 weeks.
Wow.
So
Lots of rocks.
just lots of rocks. So hard life. So we didn't know what to make of this. So, my professor started kind of asking around, and somebody mentioned, "Oh, well, had you ever heard of the Jewett City vampires?" And my professor was like, "The the hell you say? What?" So Griswold, Jewett City is kind of a section of Griswold. So they're right next to each other. As I showed on that map, Jewett City was on the left, and this area was on the right, and literally it's like a mile and a half or something. Um, so we'll get into kind of the Jewett City story itself, but that took him down a different course of investigation. So based on his discussions with some of the folklorists in the area, Michael Bell in particular, who had been doing a lot of this research in Rhode Island, um, there was a particular pattern to this folk belief in vampires, and it was all around, consumption victims, basically.
Hmm.
So, as I talked about at the beginning, there's a certain kind of look to somebody who's dying of tuberculosis.
Mhm.
Um, they end up obviously they're coughing all the time. They're often spitting up blood. Um, so they have kind of drawn face. They're losing weight, which is why it was called consumption, because basically you're being consumed by the disease. Um, so you have that gaunt look. You have the kind of pale pallor to your look. So they didn't know what caused it. Now you have to think this was, back when we didn't have germ theory.
Mhm.
Hmm.
There was no like
Um,
washing your hands or anything.
yeah, there was
Yeah.
no concept of that. The If you needed surgery on for something, you went to the barber. Like that's
Fun. Yeah.
that's why the barber poles have those different colors. It's because those were essentially like the red is from when they would have the cloth that they used to in their surgeries
Ugh.
out drying
Yeah.
outside of their area. So it's it's a different mindset, right?
Yeah.
And yet, I mean, one of the things that I want to kind of drive home for anyone who's watching this or listening, is it really that different? Like like we're in this pandemic right now,
Mhm.
and we went through some shit, right?
Mhm.
Like, I don't know what it was like where you guys were in the beginning, but people were freaked out.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
people were buying Lysol and bleach, and you know, any deliveries they would like assiduously wash outside. And I remember seeing a YouTube video of a woman just like completely flipping out at like a McDonald's drive-through because the person was touching the bag with like an ungloved hand, and like she was just going freaking ballistic.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mm.
um, because it was scary.
Mhm.
We didn't know exactly how this stuff was getting transmitted.
Yeah.
We
Fear,
didn't know
fear can lead to some irrational responses.
Mhm.
That's for
lots
sure.
of right. And at the time, science didn't wasn't entirely sure either. I mean, they were the ones who were telling us, well, wash your hands, uh, clean surfaces, make sure that things are sanitized before you bring them in, because they were erring on the side of caution.
Yeah.
Sure. Hmm.
But if you're back then and your quote unquote medical group has no idea why you're getting this disease that's killing your family, and your clergy doesn't know why you're getting it, and they have no solution, well, people started coming up with their own solutions.
Yeah.
So in New England, the solution seemed to be um, basically to exhume bodies and look for evidence of blood in the heart, because they thought that blood in the heart basically meant that they were feeding on their
Mm.
family members who were now being infected and being consumed.
Wow.
So
Hmm.
if they found blood in the heart, um, they thought that one of the solutions was to burn the heart,
Wow.
and that would stop basically the epidemic. And like I said, a full quarter of the people who died at this time frame died of this disease. So when you're in a small farming community of 300 and five people from the same family die within a year or two of each other, that's a huge red flag, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the mindset that we're talking about here. So based on what we could tell, that's kind of what happened with JB.
Mm.
That that more than likely his other family members. Well, let me step back. So um, the bones were analyzed by, I believe, Walter Reed Medical Center, by a forensic pathologist. And what they found was that his lungs, or his rib cage, showed evidence of the lesions of tuberculosis.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we know he had tuberculosis. Um, IB, we suspected, was his wife. Unfortunately, um, her skeleton was not as well preserved, but she did not show any signs of tuberculosis that they could find. But her rib cage especially was basically gone. And
And that was
NB,
from them going back in and destroying the heart. The
well,
search for blood in the heart, right?
both IB and NB were not touched. So the only
Okay.
one who was touched was JB55. So the
Okay.
other the other two were completely intact. They were never exhumed until, obviously we had to
Mm.
disinter them for this recovery effort. Um, and NB as well, who we suspect was their son, also didn't show any evidence of tuberculosis. But
Okay.
in order to show evidence of tuberculosis on the lungs, it has to be a kind of chronic condition. And you have to have had it for like 2 to 3 years. if you get what they would call in back then galloping consumption, you were basically dead within about a month.
Wow.
So it could be that they both also died of consumption, but we don't know.
Yeah.
And there's no records at all. So, yeah, what kind of came to the conclusion was that whoever went in there looking for the heart, but they went in at least 5 years or so after JB had passed away.
Wow.
I think that's one of the most interesting things about this story, because you would think after 5 years
What's left of the heart?
that would, well, not only that, but the story or the fear of what was going there would have passed. I mean, that's a lot of time for someone to die of tuberculosis, have that memory of that person looking like that, and then going back 5 years later after they've already been laid to rest and say, "Hey, we got to take care of this problem we're having." That's
Right.
that's a good amount of time to
Right.
pass.
Yeah, exactly. But for sure, what we suspect is, what Jenny mentioned, which is that there was no heart.
Yeah.
It was gone, or it
Mm,
was already gone.
mm.
So, uh,
Unless he was a
pr-
vampire.
well, and that's the other thing is that term wasn't, like I said, wasn't really used.
Yeah.
But certainly there was a belief that what they were doing was they were doing it for the living. And that's one of the things I want to kind of emphasize. This wasn't some kind of ghoulish practice. They were trying to protect their family in a way that, in kind of the only way that they could think of. Like they didn't understand how germs work. They didn't understand tuberculosis.
It was a way for them
Tuberculosis,
to feel like they had control
they
over
had control
some, yeah.
over it, right?
Mhm.
Right. But they weren't doing it to be malicious. They were, if anything, they're doing it because they wanted to protect their loved ones.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, so probably what we suspect is that they did the decapitation and the um, thigh bone thing just as kind of, well, let's see if we can stop it somehow, and this is the only option we have. Um, Interestingly, there is some long-standing traditions in in England, going back into Iron Age, of people decapitating um, folks and doing messing around with their leg bones.
Hmm.
But there's none in the Americas that we know of,
Mm,
and it doesn't match any of the other historical accounts of some of the other things that we'll talk about in the region. So none of the others had this done. So this was a pretty unique find, and a pretty
Yeah.
unique situation. Um, and like I said, as far as I know, it's the only physical evidence we have of this folk belief and likely folk belief in vampires, in North America.
But like we were saying earlier too, how many of those graves have been excavated? Not a
True.
lot.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
how I
very
wonder how
true.
many other ones were done similarly. We just don't know.
We don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thing is
Yeah.
there's a lot we don't know.
And it's interesting, like you were talking about, Joe, too, in terms of like having this popularized, the idea of the modern, of the vampire that we have in the modern age, gets tied to Bram Stoker.
Right.
And we're talking about late 1800s. So we're talking about all this kind of link, like Dracula doesn't exist.
Hmm.
Of course, Vlad the Impaler exists, but he's not linked to vampirism until Bram Stoker. So we're talking about kind of something else.
Something
I guess,
else.
yeah,
Yeah.
something else.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me see if I so there's find one of the other accounts. I don't know if anyone has any particular questions about this this case.
Yeah, if you have any questions, throw them in chat. We don't have
Yeah.
anything yet.
Well, you said you were going to tell us that you guys did figure out who he was, right?
Yes. So they had done some DNA analysis back then, but they couldn't. The there wasn't any matches basically,
Mm-hmm.
and Walter Reed did this analysis. So more recently, I believe in the last 5 or 6 years, they did another analysis. So they still have the bones um, of JB. Well, before I get into that, I do want to say what we did with the rest of um, the skeletons that we exhumed was we reinterred them um, on a different Walton cemetery,
Okay.
and we actually they found Waltons as far away as California,
Wow.
Hmm.
and they came to the reinterment ceremony,
Oh, wow. Oh, the living ones.
and the living ones,
Oh, wow.
and the Waltons themselves were members of the First Congregational Church of Griswold, and the minister was the one who you know basically performed the ceremony
Wow,
for the
that's cool.
reinterment. So
Interesting.
so I was you know kind of I guess blessed. I don't know what you call it to be a part of that. So
Yeah,
Mhm.
I was at that service.
that's cool.
So I that's one of the things as archaeologists we historically have kind of a bad reputation of being somewhat ghoulish and digging up people's dead ones and
Yeah.
leaving them in boxes and stuff in museums and we're doing a much better job of that. So we certainly with all Native American graves, there's a law called the Native American Grave and Repatriation Act, um, where anything that we find, first of all, we have to contact the local native tribes, um, and basically go with their guidance as to how they want the remains to be handled.
Yeah.
Like I said, in this case, I don't think there was another colonial cemetery that had to be excavated.
Yeah.
There could be, but that was what my professor relayed to us, was that this was something that had at the time never been done before.
Wow.
Um, so we wanted to treat the remains with respect. So
Except for JB.
um,
You said he's still at Walter Reed Medical.
I believe that they still have, yes,
Poor
his
guy.
remains. Yeah, the poor guy. I mean,
Yeah.
he went through hell before he died, of
Yeah.
course,
Then
as
they
a
mess
tuberculosis.
then they messed him up after he's dead.
Then they
Now he's
mess him up.
sitting in a
Now
box.
now he's sitting
Yeah.
in a box. So they did.
Well, let's hope he doesn't mind.
Yeah.
He was
Good
already
Lord.
he had already happily departed.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, he probably doesn't care. I mean, um, so yeah, so they reran DNA, and of course, now there's a much more
Mm-hmm.
a wider databases of people's DNA.
Yeah.
Ancestry, whatever, National Geo DNA. So they found that it was the closest match was with a family called the Barbers,
Oh.
Mm,
and they were in the Norwich area, which is the largest. It's a small city, but it's not close by. It's maybe like 5 or 10 miles away. Um, and they ended up finding records of a John Barber who died in the 1820s at the age of 55.
There he
Mm.
is.
They also found a record of his son, Nathan Barber, who died at the age of 12.
And B.
NB, but they didn't find any evidence of who IB was.
Hmm.
And they didn't have any marriage records for John Barber. So they're pretty sure that that's who this is.
Yeah.
John
Yeah.
Barber died in the 1820s in
Wow.
rural Connecticut. And they did a facial reconstruction. I didn't get a snippet of it, but um, he was a big guy. I mean, he was, for the time, 1820s, he was 6 foot.
Yeah, I was gonna say those thigh
That's pretty
bones look
large.
pretty big.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's
he
pretty large
was,
for his height.
based on all of the skeletal evidence, he was a strong, muscular dude who obviously hardworking, um,
Maybe that
worked his whole life.
maybe that's something that helped kind of lead to that myth is you take a big, strong guy. Maybe, he's someone who's, people are like, man, that's a big dude, right? And
Right,
then
right,
he gets consumption and kind of wastes away, and they're going, how is this happening to this guy?
Yeah.
Like,
right.
and yeah, I can only imagine, kind of thinking that something supernatural could be happening
Mm.
because, yeah, interesting, very, very interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's the case of JB55, a fairly locally infamous case.
Wow.
Um, so now I want to kind of jump back to the case that had originally kind of led us down this road, which is the quote unquote Jewett City vampires.
Yeah. It sounds like
Um,
a cool band name.
it actually kind of does, now that you mention it. So
Or a
this is an
roller derby girls or something.
Right,
oh,
right.
that there you go, roller derby. Yeah, I should tell that to my local. So
Yeah.
I'm actually a photographer for my local roller derby
Oh,
team.
cool. Yeah. Somebody
Yeah,
needs to
yeah.
grab it. They need to have that one.
All right, so this is an actual report from 1854. So JB was 1820s, so not that much longer after. And like I said, Jewett City, that map, they're essentially right next to each other. So in 1846, a citizen of Griswold, as they called it, Horace Ray, had died of consumption. Um, his two sons also developed the same disease and also died. The last one dying around 1852. And then a third son got consumption. And his, uh, I believe his brothers decided to exhume the bodies of the two brothers and cremate them so that they would stop feeding upon the living.
Oh my god.
So they took out the heart and burned it on the spot.
Hmm.
Wow.
Um, and this is from an actual newspaper account from the 1850s.
Wow.
So we have a connection here from the 1820s running essentially into the 1850s here of vampire lore.
Right.
Mm.
So I think if you go to maybe, oh yeah, there is another little thing. Let's see, if you go to 14, the tombstone one.
Mhm.
So this one is from the 1840s. It's kind of hard to read at the bottom, but they found this tombstone with this um, basically poem at the bottom. And if you go to the next one, um,
Hmm.
It's from a poem. Although consumption's vampire grasp had seized thy mortal frame, thy ardent and inspiring mind, untouched, remained the same.
Wow.
So this was actually on a tombstone, but also they found the original poem. And, as far as we can tell, this, other than newspaper accounts, this is the first kind of evidence of them linking consumption with kind of
Yeah.
vampires
Using that word, especially.
using that word.
Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Weird.
So, and then if you go to, let's see, the two slides, I don't think we need to do yeah, well, yeah, we don't need to do the other one. 17, the Jewett City vampires. This will give kind of the timeline of what happened. What's interesting is they, I guess they exhumed all of the victims, but they they only found one that had this quote unquote fresh heart, which was one of the more recent uh, victims of consumption. Um, so their idea was that basically as people die, that generally the blood congeals, right, and it's no longer kind of a typical viscous
Hmm.
fluid. So they thought if you found that in the heart, that means that that person was feeding on their family.
Wow.
Um, but based on kind of modern understanding of how uh, things change in decomposition, that is a typical state of blood. It will eventually kind of go back to being a liquid for a bit.
Hmm.
So it's not rare. It's a natural thing. It doesn't mean that the person's
Yeah.
feeding on your loved ones,
But they would have had
and
no idea about that.
but they would have had no idea,
Yeah.
you know.
And this is
So
a much different vampire than Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, right?
yeah, exactly.
These are vampires that have gone through a quite a long period of decomposition. This
Right,
is zombie
right.
vampire.
Yeah,
Yeah, zombie vampires.
yeah. And like I mentioned, they didn't use those terms themselves. People outside of the community would call them vampires, but they were just trying to protect their family from the consumption. So
Hmm.
um, that was a term that was used by other people uh, to explain what was happening. And but in a way, consumption is kind of a vampire disease. If you think of the classic draining your blood and draining your life force,
Hmm.
that's what that was doing to him. Um, so that element of it is common between the kind of Bram Stoker thing. It's just not the same that we think
Yeah.
of it today. Yeah.
Yeah, and to go back to this, Joe, earlier, you were drawing a little bit of comparison to what's going on even now with the pandemic,
Hmm.
COVID-19, and having a disease that you don't understand and trying to come up with solutions for how to stop it. And so, I think a story
Right.
like this is even timely
Hmm.
to discuss this because we're still in the same. There's still a lot of fear because the news changes every day. How we're
Yep.
supposed to react to COVID-19 changes.
Hmm.
And I think most people are trying to do their best with that situation. But it just goes to show you how we get people who react different ways. We can kind of draw to this is like people just like trying to figure out what the hell is going on and how do we stop
Right.
this? Different people are going to react different ways.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the last case that I kind of want to talk about is the case of Mercy Brown, and she was from Exeter, Rhode Island. Um,
Real quick, Joe, I want to stop
sure.
you one more time because I did do just a very quick research through some on the old Google machine because you had me curious with the brass tacks. So
Oh, uh huh.
I did find another um, another body that was exhumed of an enslaved person.
Oh,
And they had brass tacks on the
Mm.
bottom of their coffin, and it was originally thought that it was arranged in a heart shape. Um, and so they were thinking it was a thing put there for love. When they studied it more, they realized that it might have been actually an African symbol
Mm.
that would have had a meaning about the past and the future.
oh,
So
interesting.
I would imagine just from finding that
And that was on
what
the
we're
bottom, you said.
it was on the bottom.
So it was probably hidden.
Because they only found it when they exhumed them. So I think we can probably come to at least a little bit of a conclusion that putting words or images or numbers in a coffin with brass tacks would have been, if not common, it did happen at
It
least,
did happen, right?
other than
Right.
just this scenario. And I also found out through that that's where the saying "let's get down to brass tacks" might come from.
Yeah. Hmm.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
yep.
Yeah, all kinds of.
All right. Didn't want to interrupt your story, but I would have
Oh, yeah, yeah.
if I didn't
That's
say anything,
great.
I would have forgot it.
Well, that's good because we're moving on to a different tale. So, um, in March, as recent as March of 1892, there was a front page headline of the Providence Journal that read this: "Exhume the bodies, testing a horrible superstition in the town of Exeter. Bodies of dead relatives taken from their graves. They had all died of consumption, and the belief was that live flesh and blood would be found that fed upon the bodies of the living."
Mm. That's in
So,
1892.
1892.
So it's like almost a whole century that this is going on.
Yes.
Wow.
So this is in a town called Exeter, which is Rhode Island is interesting in that it's the smallest state.
Hmm.
Um, but it's also it has all of the typical settlement patterns that we think of. It's got a densely urban center of Providence. It's got current suburbs, and it's got really rural areas all within kind of a short distance. It's almost like everything's, because it's such a small state, the settlement patterns have been really compressed. So
Yeah.
instead of, you think of like a big city like Chicago, before you get out to the farmland, it's quite a ways.
Hmm.
Well, in Rhode Island, it's,
There's no room
10
for around
miles.
that. Yeah.
It's like 10 miles. But you go through all of those kind of, areas. So even today, Exeter is not that built up. I mean, it's probably more built up than the 1890s.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was a a case where another family had consumption. In this case, it was um, the women, and the daughter died. Uh, I believe she died last, but there was a son that was infected, and they exhumed the bodies. The mother, they didn't find any evidence of this kind of fresh blood in the heart. Again, that's kind of like their um I don't know, their what they were using as their evidence of
Yeah.
this vampirism. But Mercy Brown did.
Mm.
And right there they burnt the heart in the cemetery, And there's varying accounts. One account says that they burnt the heart and then they mixed it into a potion and made the son that had it drink the potion.
Mm.
But but
Now who's a
um,
vampire?
that didn't occur. That particular part of the story isn't in all of the accounts. Um, so even today, you know, they have to have like basically guards at the cemetery where Mercy Brown is um, buried
Mm.
around Halloween because people will come and do stuff, and they would chip away at her headstone.
Oh wow.
Um, and so, as far as we know, this was the last like official case of New England vampire accounts.
I think it is. Does it say on her headstone that she was only 19?
I think she was like 19. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, I think there's in one of the other in the 19 current. Oh yeah, this is a like an I don't know what you'd call it, like a headline
Yeah.
uh, from
A member of the
from
anti-vampire party.
right from the I believe this is from the Connecticut Current, which is now the Hartford Current, um, which is also the longest continuously published newspaper in what is now the United States.
Wow.
It actually predates the back in colonial times. Um, but yeah, this kind of thing showed up in the newspaper.
That's crazy.
So
Um,
we've come along over 100 years here, and it seems like the more things change, the more things stay the same. Where we've
Yeah.
gone from, I
right,
guess, the pro vampire party and the anti vampire party.
anti right, you know it. I don't know. I might actually like get on board with one of those parties, considering
Yeah, why not?
our current buffoons that we have on all of
Well,
the parties in
oh,
office.
Yeah.
well, Joe, you have to pick a side. So
I
you
really
got to get
don't.
on one. You have to be either anti-vampire or pro-vampire. There's no hanging
Oh,
out in.
okay. I gotcha.
There's no hanging out in the middle.
No,
There's
yeah.
there's there's no middle ground. Yeah,
You're
yeah.
either burning hearts or you're getting your heart burned. Just one or the other.
Right, one or
Yeah.
the other.
I like this little
So there,
drawing too. It's like looks like they're like bullet like the horses are pulling like a coffin or something, and that
right.
like
Yeah.
vampire hunter guy is like ready to burn the shit out of
Hmm.
some hearts. Let's
Yeah.
get on it.
There is one last story that's kind of interesting. I don't have a slide for it,
Uh,
but there was uh, um, a husband and wife who were married in Manchester, Vermont. So this is a different part of New England. Um,
Probably
and
stole a lot of rocks though. I
it's probably still a
bet.
lot of rocks. Yeah. So in this case, the wife dies of consumption, um, and nothing really happened as a result. The husband gets remarried, and within a year or two, his second wife
Mm.
dies of consumption. The villagers, townspeople, thought that it was the first wife who was jealous of the second wife.
Yeah.
So they go and dig up the first wife
Ay, ay, ay.
and burn her heart. Of course,
Oh.
more than likely, it's the husband, right? The husband's
Yeah.
probably like a long chronic
Mhm.
carrier of tuberculosis.
Yeah.
So he's probably the one who's carrying it, but they ended up like desecrating the wife.
Oh my goodness, that's crazy.
So, you know,
we have to make sure.
Yeah.
we have to make sure. Yes, right,
Yes.
right.
Absolutely certain.
as the member of the pro vampire
Yeah,
party,
the
Right.
we need to double check.
anti-vampire party. I
So
love it.
then if we go to the last slide, we get to Mr. Bram Stoker.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, so this obviously is where we get our current kind of thoughts on
I don't think
what
I've ever seen a
vampires
picture of
was.
Bram Stoker.
Mhm.
He's not nearly as
So
interesting looking as I thought he would be.
so it's only 5 years after this Mercy Brown
Oh
incident
yeah.
in Rhode Island that he publishes this. Um, the other thing is that you now see it kind of brought to a look at these ignorant fools kind of concept of what are these people doing, what are these ghouls doing digging up these bodies, and so that kind of changes the narrative quite a bit.
Hmm.
And so as a result, for us it's really like kind of shocking that somebody's family, and it was
Yeah.
often the family, the immediate family, that would go and do this kind of thing. They would dig up their bodies of their relative, um, and perform these kind of weird uh, rituals to quote unquote help with stopping the spread of this disease. Um, and not long after this, they identified the tuberculosis. Um, but they still didn't have like a cure until I think the 1940s,
Hmm.
through the 60s.
Yep.
And so the
TB vaccine.
yeah, the best thing that they could do for it was um, sanitariums. So
Hmm.
you have
Stick them all
this,
together. Yep.
Mhm.
yeah, but you have them isolated, but you also have them exposed to a lot of fresh air.
Hmm.
Often these sanitariums were put in places, near the coast,
Hey
in the
Maggie.
mountains, that kind of thing, and it actually like really cut down on the amount of people dying from consumption or tuberculosis. It was a way of, you know, not only isolating those with it, but there were people who survived with tuberculosis and got out of those sanitariums.
Yeah. Hmm.
So before they had an actual cure for it, they were doing the best they could
Yeah.
to with what they knew of the medical science and everything else, and it was really pretty effective, the sanitarium. So, um, coming back to our own situation, I don't know how many people know this, but uh, Lysol was used in the Spanish flu epidemic. Like and it was advertised as a means of disinfecting to protect people from the Spanish flu.
I didn't realize
Mm.
I had been around that long.
And the this is the part that, in some ways, is interesting to me, but also kind of annoying. The suggestion during the Spanish flu for how people could protect themselves: stay away from other people, wear masks, socially distance.
Hmm.
They added one other thing that we didn't that our current medical people didn't tell us to do. They said, "Go out into the sunshine."
Yeah.
And what you actually find in sanitariums was they ended up moving a lot of the patients out of the buildings during the Spanish flu epidemic outside, and they would get natural vitamin D, which was,
Hmm.
you know, um, helps with your immune system to fight off this disease. So, an epidemic that was 100 years ago, they're doing essentially the same thing
Yeah.
Yeah.
up until the vaccines came out that we were being told to do, and it was kind of eye-opening when I read about that and
Yeah.
just said, "Oh my god, like, in some ways, we've completely advanced in 100 years, and in
In
other ways,
some
we really
ways.
haven't."
In other ways.
They haven't even told us to go outside yet. What the hell are
Yeah.
they waiting for?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
We did this 100 years ago, people.
Well,
Yeah.
and, like, the 1890s and 1830s, this was a different epidemic,
Mhm.
kind of a slow burn epidemic instead of
Yeah.
a pandemic like we had,
Yeah.
and the Spanish flu had. So,
There was one thing I was thinking about, like, 'cause like, you were talking about how the vampire digging up the bodies, burning the heart thing can be viewed as 2 different ways. Like, one way it can be looked at as, like, this horrible thing, like, these ignorant people are doing, but on the other hand, they're thinking, like, if you look at it from their perspective, they're just trying to save their family. And I think as us as mediums, we deal with people who are going through grief at all stages all the
right,
time. And if you've lost people that are close to you, which most people have, or you will at some point in your life, I think if you look at it from that perspective, because these people aren't just losing one person, they're losing multiple people in their family. And
right.
to be going through that kind of grief where half of your family was wiped out, you would
Mhm.
do anything to keep the
And
rest of your family alive.
and 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 to just kind of put on top of that, to lose them in that way too,
Mhm.
where you see them slowly kind of waste away and turn
Yeah.
into like kind of a shell of themselves, and you're thinking to yourself, what happened? How is this?
Yeah.
What's causing this? And there's no
Right,
answers. We don't
right,
know anything about germs, microbiology. All of that's still, yeah, from the 1820s. It's still almost 100 years away. You know.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, one of the other things at that time, they had a very strong belief that nobody should die alone. So,
I
there was
still think that that's true. When we've had to
right.
do this in this pandemic where we see all these people have to go to the hospital and like no one's with them, like it's
No one no, yeah.
heartbreaking.
It's
Yeah.
heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It really is. So, they didn't understand, the germs and
Yeah.
cleanliness in the same sense that we do. Um, but they also had, in some ways, a little more, in my opinion, a little more humanity with their dying relatives
Mhm.
than than many people had the chance during this pandemic.
Oh yeah.
It was um, heartbreaking to hear from some of my brother's friends who their family they had family members who died either from with COVID or from something else during the early times of the pandemic. Nobody could be there.
Yeah.
They couldn't. Not only could they not be there, they couldn't have what they wanted of
Mhm.
in their case traditional funerals.
Yeah.
They were not allowed to do it.
Yeah.
Um, and that was hard. That's heartbreaking. Like I
Yeah.
lost both my parents, and I can't imagine going through without having that ability to be able to say goodbye to them.
Oh yeah. No, it's unbelievable. It's what so many people are having to go through with
Right.
this.
Mhm.
Yeah. Which I think is uh, going on to a different part of the subject here. I think that's probably one reason why there's so many of us being called to do this medium work because there's going to be so many more of us that are needed.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think one of the other things that our modern life didn't allow many of us to have that introspective time to kind of work through things, whatever it is.
Hmm.
Um,
We got to slow down
and
and
we got
look
to
and
slow
think.
down.
Yeah.
And, some of us heard that calling. Maybe we've heard that calling our whole life and didn't really understand it, which in my case, I kind of feel that.
Yeah, me too.
Um,
I didn't understand what it was.
what it was, but
Yeah,
I knew there was something I should be doing, and
exactly.
it
Yep,
wasn't what I was doing, or
yep,
I got enjoyment out of it. Obviously, I love as an archaeologist, and even as a software developer, I love the creative process of creating software out of basically nothing.
yeah,
Um, and I still do that kind of thing anyway. Go- But yeah, there was always some kind of piece that was missing. So
me too. I kept thinking, I'm supposed to be doing something with this. I'm supposed to be doing something with this, but I had no idea what it was until like right before the pandemic hit. I was like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
well, what's interesting is I still don't entirely know what I'm supposed to be doing
Yeah.
with my mediumship, and so that part, I'm glad you found your
Well, I
your
think
way. But like
we're
for
we're
me,
we're still evolving because me and you are
right?
on the same, like we kind of started at the same time. So we're still going to
Yeah, I think
be
so.
evolving and figuring out what exactly our process is or where we stand in all of it. But just to know that we can do it and that we can help other people by doing it, I think is a big deal.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing, after just kind of to get personal, after my parents passed away, you know, I I was looking for some way to kind not exactly give back, but like seeing the kind of care that the hospice nurses were giving my father, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, just to see that kind of, attention to detail and everything else that is they know is an end of life situation.
Hmm.
He's not in hospice because he's going to get better.
Yeah.
That isn't why you go to hospice.
Yeah.
Um, and that was inspiring, but I just didn't know where to put it, what to do with it. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, there was somebody in one of our classes, I don't know if you were in it, was talking about um death doulas. Do you know
that
about?
was
Yeah.
right.
It's like the opposite of the birthing doula. You're like helping someone pass instead of bringing someone in. And
Right.
I don't know if I could personally handle that, but it's that would be an interesting thing to look into. And I guess the hospice nurses kind of are that, whether they realize it or not.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'd actually taken a class on Atlas Obscura has different classes, and they have a class I think that's taught pretty regularly called The Art of Death, um, and it's all about how we deal with death, and different ways of dealing with death, and that kind of thing. And one of the subject was death doulas, and we actually had a guest speaker who was a death doula. She was also a hospice nurse.
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
So part of what they do as well is help the family,
Yes.
especially in cases where they know it's a terminal situation, and the person is still cognizant and can not just tell you what they want, but you can, as a family, bounce ideas off each other
Hmm.
and how they want their remains taken care of, how they want their life celebrated, um, that kind of thing, and so that you're respecting the wishes of the person while they're still alive and still able to talk about that
Yeah.
instead of after the fact. Normally, sadly, a lot of people are like, "Well, I don't know where the will is. Do you know where the will is?"
Yeah.
No.
Searching for
Where's the
paperwork.
will? I don't know. They're searching
Um,
searching for paperwork, and it's like, wow.
for sure.
Hey, Darth. I hope you're doing
Uh,
well. I'm doing good.
yeah.
I like your little goat emoji. Cute.
Once again, everybody, if you have any questions, anything you wanna ask Joe or Jenny, throw it in there, and we'll pass it along. But I was gonna say, Joe, like I just lost my mother. It's been a couple years ago. She actually passed right before COVID hit. So when COVID kind of became a big thing in January, February, March, my mom had passed in November before.
Okay.
And that's exactly the issue we had. Like my mom was someone who very kind of meticulously broke down like, hey, this is what I kind of want to happen, and I have this jewelry, and this is who I want this jewelry to go to. But she never actually created the will. She just told us. And it's
And
like, of
Yeah.
course, yeah, we
and
got
then
it, we
when
got it, we
she
got it.
died, nobody remembered any.
And no
Yeah.
one remembered. So we kind of went through her stuff and we're like, okay, this she would have won. But it's just one of those things. It's like, we're going to, yeah, that's fine, mom. We'll handle it when we have to worry about it. But you very quickly realize, the first time for me losing a parent, that it's not as easy to remember all that. And for sure, I think to have some kind of idea about preparing for death is kind of in my mind now of where it
Yeah.
wasn't
Right.
before. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear about your mom. That's really traumatic. It doesn't matter,
Well, thank
you
you.
know, what
Yeah.
what you even if you know it's coming. Like in the case of my dad, he'd been in the hospital for like 2.5 weeks before he passed. So, and he had had multiple strokes. He had had pancreatitis. He had lymphoma. He had leukemia.
Wow.
He had lots of problems. He eventually died of pneumonia, as it turns out, because basically the chemo killed his immune system and he caught pneumonia.
Mm.
Um, so it's happening. It's coming up, but after it happens, you know, the your brain doesn't process things the same way.
No.
Mhm.
I don't know if you went through the same thing, but I was in a fog for like at least a month. Like people would ask me stuff and I'd go and like, this was at work. I'd go and go do something. I'd be like, the hell am I doing? Who am I doing this for?
Yeah.
And they'd come back and ping me, hey, have you got that answer? I'm like, oh shit, sorry.
Yeah.
And always before that, I was on top of stuff and people knew they could rely on me. And
Yeah. It
so,
it's a
and it's
weird.
fast.
Yeah.
That's the other thing people don't understand is they then today you've got to decide what you're going to do with them tomorrow.
Yeah.
And
And
you've got
it's
to get
so
plans.
much stuff.
And it's so much stuff.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's
It's so much
unbelievable how
stuff.
much stuff
And
you
the
have to do.
and the people who are the most ill-equipped to make those decisions at the time are the ones who are stuck doing it all.
Yeah.
Right, mentally, and I remember my brother. I don't know how the hell he did this, but he called all of the far flung friends of my parents when either one of them, they both passed away in our case, 4 years apart. But he took care of all that, and I'm like, I don't know how you got through that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
that was kind of the situation for me. It was like my mom passed. I knew my dad was going to be a wreck, and actually, they were living in Maine. They had moved up there, and so I was still down here in Virginia, and so I knew my dad was going to be a mess. I knew my mom was going to be a mess,
You mean your
and I was like,
sister?
okay, I'm gonna go. Oh yeah, sorry, my sister, and I was like, I'm gonna have to go up there and help get them through this and take care of this. And he talked about walking around afterwards, kind of in that fog for a while, and for a long time it was for me because I think I had to take care of so many things and try to be kind of the strong person through that time. It didn't hit me till much later, and even now, I think it's been two years, through this whole pandemic, uh, where I've really just noticed over the last year where I'm actually getting to a point now where I'm going, you know, actually processing and going through those like
processing it,
grief
right?
steps.
Yeah.
And as someone who had lost, like grandparents and stuff, but never really lost someone that, your mother, to lose your mother is, but to really understand what people talk about and when you see people talking about grief and those kinds of things, for sure it was something that kind of caught me off guard because I thought I'd gone through it. We've gone through the funeral. It's all over. We go through a
Right,
couple months. I'm
right.
supposed to get better. And it was getting worse.
Yeah.
So
Darth
definitely something I
Darth
think
has
that's
a
a good point.
Darth has a comment said I could see that kind of putting your emotions aside and become the logical person who's going to set everything in motion. Yeah, somebody
Yeah.
has to, because there's just like a ton of stuff you got to do when somebody dies.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
And it can be a coping mechanism for a lot of people, I'm sure too. A
Yeah.
lot of people want to get right back into work. They want to get their mind off of it. So
I
yeah,
don't
for
want to
sure, I
have
can
time
see
to
that.
think about it. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
yeah, but like you said, you're get eventually you're gonna process that loss,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I don't know about you, but I mean, it's been almost 10 years now since my mom died, and it still sometimes really hits me. And one of the things that one of our family friends told us, he was of our parents' age. He said, "I'm gonna tell you something, but there's still times 30 years later where I want to pick up the phone and call my mom,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm like, oh, that sucks. And now I'm like, oh, hey, mom, how you doing? You know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
now,
I just
now I can kind of can.
Yeah.
So and
yeah.
probably all of us can, and
Yeah.
we don't realize it. But
Yeah,
Hmm.
I get to live with medium Jenny Lee, so I get
Yeah.
right,
messages. I get messages from my mother on
Yeah.
the
all
reg,
the time,
Hmm.
right?
and
Yeah,
and I was just that was something we were discussing the other night, in these late night conversations. I said exactly what you just said. Like right now is a time where people are going about career changes. We were talking about this earlier. It's a time where people are kind of redefining how they're thinking about how they want to live their life. So, I've speculated. I wonder, about this. Maybe we should make a change. And I told Jenny, I said, "Man, I wish I could call my mom. Like, I need to have that confirmation that, hey,
right.
yeah, that sounds like a good idea, or maybe you should rethink that." And even though, yeah, I love my wife and all these things, there's still something innate in you, at least for me, that wants just like that little bit of confirmation from the mother that you can't get. But since I get to live with medium Jenny,
Right.
I can get those little confirmations
Yeah. I
sometimes, which is
haven't
nice.
heard from her yet about that. I'll have to look into it. Darth has another comment. Says, "Yeah, your body is going to feel it in one way or another, and a lot of emotions that you bury deep down
Yeah,
inside comes in your body physically hurting from it sitting there so long." Yep,
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
absolutely.
And
Gotta.
it's sometimes, at least for me, it's little things like, you know, just s- little fleeting moments on a TV show that just I'm like will remind you of, either in my case, either one of my parents.
Hmm.
And it's you know can be tough,
Yeah,
so,
I
and
lost.
that's from somebody who has dealt with grief for a long time. I've
Yeah,
lost a lot of family members.
my brother
So,
passed away in 2008, so how many years
oh
that
boy.
is, and yeah, same thing. Like I don't. It was the same thing. There was something we were watching not too long ago, and it had something to do
Mhm.
with a brother or something, and it just knocked me sideways. It's like brings back
Yeah, and
all that stuff. Yeah,
you don't expect it, right? Because
yeah, hmm
and you thought, okay, I've processed this
yeah.
already, and
It's been a
this
long
loss,
time.
and
I don't think about that. I don't think about it that much anymore. And then all of a sudden, it's like, you know, you
boom.
got the waterworks going. You're like, what the hell?
Right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it never really goes away.
And that kind of goes back to, I think, what you were talking about earlier, Jenny, about uh, calling for mediums.
Yep.
Because, I don't have it in front of me, but over these last couple of years, there's a lot of people who have died. There were going to be a lot of people who died anyway, but those numbers are exceedingly high. And so
hmm
I could see where there's going to be a need. There'll be a need for people to try to connect and
And
get that moment of reassurance.
just knowing all the people that we've come in contact with who've taken classes with Cindy, like it's a lot
Right.
of people. It's
Oh
a
yeah.
lot. And whether they go on to do it professionally or not, it doesn't really matter. It's the fact that they know
No.
they can do it, they can do it for themselves, they can do it for their loved ones. And yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and everyone, in those classes is there for, different reasons, right?
yep.
Some people are trying to understand what it is, what they've been dealing with their whole lives,
hmm
and some others are just trying to understand what's been awakened recently.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, it always kind of amazes me at, the you're not, of course, as a medium supposed to like kind of compare yourself because we're all on our own paths, but
Yeah.
just some of the how amazing some of our classmates
Oh
are,
yeah.
and it's just like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, she's so much better than me. This is crazy.
That's the way I feel about the damn automatic writing. Like there was some lady
Oh
talking to
yeah,
angels and shit during the automatic writing class, and I was like, I can't even get anything to come out except some scribbles.
some scribbles, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But yes, there's no comparing. We cannot compare ourselves to
yeah.
others.
We're
Yeah.
all on our own path,
Hmm.
right? And we
Yeah.
all have our own innate strengths and weaknesses and
Oh
things
yeah.
that we need to work on. And I don't know, Jenny, if you found this, but when I first was taking classes, I was very strongly clairvoyant. Like almost that was all I was getting. I was
Yeah.
getting like the film reel kind of thing. I was seeing as if I was watching a home movie of somebody.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't get that as much anymore.
So what
But
is the Claire that you're getting more often now?
I just know. So claircognizance, I just
Yeah.
know. I just know that this person
Mm.
died from this. Sometimes they're clairsentient where I can feel what they died from.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think even Cindy said that hers changes
yeah, it
still too.
changes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it changes. But it's just interesting how, you know, at first it was I was reading somebody else who was trying to talk with their teacher about, well, at first it was so like vivid and like it was so detailed, and now it's much more subtle. And basically the teacher was like, well, yeah, because Spirit was like having to work overtime before to, to knock you over the head to get you
Yeah,
to realize what was happening.
that makes
And that
sense.
and now they don't have to work as hard.
Yeah.
And so why would they?
Yeah, that's
Oh,
true.
yeah, okay, that makes sense.
I think for
Yeah.
me though, mine was different. Mine was very subtle at the in the beginning, and I had to really listen
Mm,
and feel it, like to know whether it was really for real or not. And now mine is just like a hodgepodge of stuff. Like I
yeah.
can, when I do readings on here, I can have a reading where I do remote viewing and I'm at somebody's house that they lived at when they were a kid and we're walking through the woods and I see everything like it's a movie. And then the next person I get, I'll know something. And the next person, I felt something physically, or it's just like, it's just all over the place. And like, I don't really have
One. Yeah.
one that's like sticks out.
Yeah, like there's been times where you smelled something or people are talking to you or there's all kinds of different ways that
Hmm.
that
Right.
manifests itself. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think I've only had a few whiffs of things. And actually, I think, Jenny, we were in that psychic investigation class
Hmm. Well, I
with
wasn't in the class. I was just in it when she had her come and talk to
in
us.
talk to us. Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I think it was the same one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Um
you wanted to talk about that. Let's talk about it.
well, that one so the if if it was the same, because she had a separate class and the one where she talked to us, I can't remember which was which now.
The one that I
Um
was in was when we did the remote viewing stuff for the fentanyl case.
okay, yeah.
Hmm.
And then was that also the one where she told us the known case with her friend
Yes.
who had ended up being killed by the boyfriend or something, and
Yes.
he was
Hmm. And she
locked
wanted to
away?
see if we could figure out the stuff before she told us the information. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So that yeah, okay, so that's the same one I'm thinking of. So that one, that was the only time I got ever, what's it called? Clairgustance, the
You
tasting.
can taste something. Yeah.
And I tasted. blood in my mouth
Oh my God.
when we were working on that first case.
Yeah.
And it was really strong, and I was like,
Yeah. You know what's
I
really
mean,
weird is I didn't say anything last night. Last night we were playing video games together with some of our friends, and we were on Discord together. And that happened to me last night, and I don't know where it came from or what it was. But it was like all of a sudden in the back of my mouth, I could taste blood, and it was almost like blood was running down the back of my throat, like from my nose. And I was like,
oh,
what in the hell is that? Because I know it's not really blood. It's not happening, you know?
it's not happening, right?
But like, I don't know where that came from. Because it's not like I was doing a reading for someone or I knew that there was a spirit around or like, so like, what the hell was that? And then it made me worry that it was a premonition. Like, okay, well, am
Oh,
I gonna
mhm.
get hurt or is somebody I know gonna get hurt? And like, I hadn't said anything about it to anybody, but now that you said that, I felt like I had to share it.
Right.
So I
But
don't know.
and I think in that case, if I remember correctly, she ended up being stabbed to death.
I think so.
Um,
Yeah.
so I that one was interesting because I got the sensation that she was hit over the head. Um, but Jennifer said there was no evidence of that, but yet she was tied up, and I mean, just gets kind of tied up without getting kind of knocked out first. So
Yeah.
I still kind of believe she probably got knocked on the head.
Yeah, and
Or
well, and that's interesting because there's been stuff that we've been connected to before where police know the end result to a degree that but sometimes the details from a medium can go kind of beyond that. And at first you're
right,
saying the police are saying, well, we don't have evidence for this, and and at some point you almost go, well, you probably need to listen because
Yeah.
this is the stuff you're missing. And just for chat, this is one of the things that I've seen happen, and that's uh, definitely invite. I always invite skepticism to all this stuff, and we're kind of
oh yeah,
learning about all these things together. And um, m- there's a lot of police and a lot of three-letter organizations for the federal government that are not that do believe this and aren't skeptics, and
Well,
it's interesting to
the
know
lady that was
how
in the class with
prevalent
us, she works for the
it actually
FBI.
is. Yeah.
She works for the FBI. Yeah.
yeah. So she does work with pro bono work
Yeah.
with the FBI.
Of
I mean,
course,
that's
they're
the
not
other
going
thing
to
is,
pay her. They can't put her on the payroll, but they should.
yeah, and that's the other thing that you know they reached out to her
Hmm.
as opposed to the other way around. Because on open cases they always get like people who are, you know, I'm psychic and this is what I'm seeing, and that can also be kind of bad in the sense of if you lead them down a rabbit hole that's wrong,
Hmm.
you're kind of wasting their time and wasting resources. So
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah, I know that the other case, and I don't know how much we can talk about it, to be honest, because it was an open case.
Hmm.
But there was a case involving fentanyl, um, and as it turned out, one of the things that I found um, ended up breaking the case open. The FBI was kind of stuck, and I don't want to give too many details because
Yeah.
they arrested the person, and um, it was a major fentanyl ring, and lots of people have died as a result of this fentanyl ring. So,
Yeah.
um, it was interesting because it was one of those things, Jenny, where how Cindy told us, well, even if you don't think it's right, just throw it out there.
Yep. Hmm.
So I wasn't gonna say anything, and it was one of the last things that we actually presented as evidence.
And it ended up
And
being the thing.
And when I ended up taking Jennifer Schaefer's other class, she saw me in it, and in the intro, basically, she's like, "Okay, so Joe, I want to tell you what you found
Yeah.
on that other case. Blew this open. I
Wow.
was sitting there like wide open. I didn't know. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my god.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I mean, privately, I can tell you too, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to
Yeah. I
put
want
it
to
out
share.
Yeah.
publicly.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's really cool. Confirmation.
Hmm.
right, and that that felt very different in the sense that it actually felt like I was making a difference, not just a necessarily a one-on-one emotional difference, but like an actual difference that could help save
Yeah.
somebody from these monsters.
Hmm.
And that to me was really really gratifying, and
Yeah.
to be able to help law enforcement to put some scumbag like that behind bars. And
Yeah.
it wasn't like they took what I said and used that as proof. They obviously used that as a lead to
Hmm.
investigate and got all the proof, and they ended up put it convicting him. So
Yeah. That's awesome.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I've done one thing for the police, but I don't know how I feel about doing any more. Like at first I was like, I think I could probably do that. But I don't know. It to me it was like they can't tell you anything.
yeah,
They don't let you know if what you told them is helpful or not.
You only kind of get the confirmation when they come back to you,
Yeah. And like
6 months later and go,
yeah,
okay, all right, tell us some more.
yeah.
right.
So
Yeah.
for me it was like I don't know if I helped or not. And not that that should be a deciding factor on whether I would help again, but it was just kind of frustrating to me, I think.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's in some ways like doing kind of personal psychic readings. You kind of for future stuff. You kind of also know that, right? Like you're not gonna know necessarily if what you foresaw comes true until it happens, and it may not happen for months or years.
Yeah.
So the fact that you don't get that feedback is can be a little frustrating.
Yeah. 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 And it was also very emotional, that one, because it was a missing person who,
Oh, yeah,
I know is not alive anymore.
right.
Um, and it was, it got really heavy emotionally for me. And so
Mm.
I don't know how well I am equipped to do that kind of work because
Yeah, yeah, right.
I get way too emotional about stuff and it was too much.
Yeah, she in her other class we did another one where it was a missing person case. And I hadn't heard anything back as to whether anyone in the class
Yeah.
had hits. But she also had another control for a known case.
Hmm.
And what was interesting was I think all she gave us was the person's first name. And, she obviously knew what the case was
Hmm.
and had seen all the evidence. Um, and like when I kind of, went into it and felt into it, I had an image of kind of a pretty good looking girl in like her 20s who had kind of like the winged eyeliner goth look. But I was looking at her side of her face like kind of up close. I
Hmm.
didn't have a great like view of her. she gave us some more information and we did some other stuff. And then eventually she revealed more information and she showed us a picture. And honest to God, that was who I freaking saw.
Oh, that's
Like
awesome.
my jaw dropped. I was like, "Oh my God!" Not only did I see her, but it was almost like I had a zoomed in view of this exact
Of
picture.
that picture. Wow.
And so, I don't know if I was picking it up off of Jennifer,
Yeah.
the instructor, or what, but that kind of, I won't say freaked me out, but it kind of freaked me out a little bit
Yeah.
because it was so detailed. Um,
Yeah. Isn't it weird that we know what we can do, but there's still times when the stuff that happens can like blow us away?
Still be kind of jaw dropping.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. That
yeah,
happens. That happens, I would say maybe once or twice a month on my streams and because I throw out all this stuff and I don't know if any of it's gonna fit or make sense or they'll be able to take it or not. And then every once in a while there's one where it's like everything I said was correct. And that's
Yeah.
to me still like
right.
unbelievable to myself.
Oh, and when it's really impressive too, trying to get into, as somebody looking at from this as an outsider, not being a
Right.
medium, doing an experimental stream, for the first time on Twitch to see if you can do medium readings when the only thing you have is Gamer Boy 123,
Yeah. You
Right.
can't
and
see
being
them, you
able
don't know
and
their
being able
name.
to
Yeah.
create a connection, or whatever you would like to call that, where you can where you can get a reading for them. You
Mhm.
know, I didn't even
Right.
know if that would be
I didn't
possible,
know if it was
and
gonna work
it's
or not.
definitely been
And it, yeah,
100% been
it
possible.
does.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of fascinating how it works, or you know,
However it
we
works,
don't
we
know
don't
how it
know.
works per se, but the fact that it does work
Yeah.
is
We don't know how it works, but
interesting.
it works.
But it
Yeah.
works. Yeah.
Mhm.
But it's all, intention setting, right? And
Yes.
Yeah.
the intention is to connect with that person's relatives.
Mhm.
And maybe that's all of the secret sauce, really, in some ways.
Yeah. I'm starting to realize that intention has so much to do with everything. Like not just
Yeah.
doing readings for people, but everything. Is
Yeah, it's,
yeah.
and kind of coming back to the original vampire, discussion we had, the the intent what's interesting is some of those cases after there's a few other cases that I didn't go into, that I don't have enough details to, but in those cases they perform this kind of, you know, to us macabre ritual of burning the heart, um, and it stopped. Like
Yeah.
people didn't get didn't get it anymore in that area.
Which is
And
probably why they kept doing
was
it.
that just the intention of them
Yeah.
believing that
Mm,
this stopped, and them manifesting the with that belief, the fact that it did stop.
Yeah. They believed that it would, so it
yeah,
did.
that conversation between prayer and
Right.
ritual and all
Yeah.
those things, and why does it seem to work no matter what people believe?
Mhm.
Right. Right.
Um, Interesting. Well, medium Jenny, I think we're starting to
I
cruise in
know.
on
It's almost
those
Yep.
witching
10:30.
hours.
Blah.
Um, we appreciate you
Yeah,
coming
Joe.
into the stream tonight,
So
Joe. Had a
fun.
blast. Thank you so very much.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks
this was
for
great.
sharing all this awesome vampire information. Now I definitely want to go back to New England and go on
Yeah, we
the
were just there. We were just there last summer. We
yeah.
went up to Maine, so
And
yeah,
we
we
were
went
in
through
Rhode
Salem
Island.
and in
Yeah.
Massachusetts. We went to Rhode Island, so we drove through Connecticut, so we got to
Hey, Salty
see
Frog.
those
Thanks
places
for
firsthand.
contributing to the
Um,
30-minute Terror video giveaway.
I feel like there was still a lot to talk about, so we would love sometime down the road to have you back on again, Joe, if you're willing to do that. Um,
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Joe
I,
is a
I don't know
wealth of
what other
knowledge.
crazy stories I have, but
Well, I feel like we could just talk about weird stuff all night. And there was
Yeah.
there was things that I wanted to ask you that we never got to. So I think we will have to come, you'll have to come back.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Um,
just as an aside, one of my professors at Washington State University was the first like professional anthropologist to um, investigate Bigfoot on an academic level.
Oh, I love Bigfoot.
So we were talking about cryptids earlier with
Yeah,
chupacabra and everything else, and
there's a squatch in them woods.
yeah, so and his one of his not his student but a colleague of his at I believe it's Idaho State, um, Meldrum, I think something Meldrum is one of the other professional anthropologists who
yeah.
shows up on some of those Bigfoot shows. So
Awesome. I
I
love
had a
Bigfoot.
um, I had a political science professor who went to a political science lecture event was being held in the city. So all the political science professors from America and other countries are coming into this place to attend the lectures and the conference and all that. And he told us a story about going to the bar, and all the political science people are there, and he sits down, and he starts having a drink, and he talks to the guy next to him, and hey, what are you doing? And he says, I'm a whatever, and I hunt Bigfoot. That's what I do. That's my job. And he was like, I talked to that guy for like 5 hours at the bar. He was the most interesting guy in the room. I don't want to talk to any of the other damn political science professors. And so I just found it interesting from that point of view how, a lot of times, we talk about academia not getting on board with the paranormal. But so oftentimes I've already come across lots of people that are in academia that are fascinated by these subjects and don't dismiss them as quickly as people I think that they do.
Hmm.
yeah, it's just whether they want to take that risk of political professional suicide.
Yeah.
Essentially,
Yeah.
in my professor's case, he was denied a full professorship for the longest time, in part because of his academic interest in Bigfoot.
Mm.
Well, we have
So
a we can talk about this again another time, but yeah, we have a
yeah, yeah,
university
oh,
right down the
absolutely,
road here. We have a university right down the road, UVA, the University of Virginia, and they actually are one of the only universities that has like a paranormal. Well, they had a professor. I'm not sure if he's still there.
I think he
You'll see
is.
him in a lot of national programs, but where he does like past life.
He
Uh,
studies
oh
uh,
past lives.
he
Yeah.
studies past life and has gathered a lot of evidence for people who have past life experiences and
Hmm.
stuff like that. So yeah, we're in a transition there. That happens in history too. Something else we can talk about, like we've talked about this before. Different theories of ancient civilizations and how certain evidence won't be accepted by modern
right,
academia and history and stuff like that. So I think we definitely got some stuff
Oh, yeah.
we could talk about in another
Hmm.
show. So
yeah, and maybe more of a a discussion instead of me just yammering on about findings and stuff. So,
Yeah, we can have
so
a
that would be great.
that's good
general
stuff.
weirdo
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah.
But
There's
no,
Exactly.
I really enjoyed your vampire talk, and I thought it was fascinating.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
Yeah, of course. And Salty Frog, I'm so glad that you popped in at the end. Yes, please go back and watch this one. This
you
is
gave
very
great
interesting.
this will be going up on YouTube. So
Yes.
if you missed the part about the vampires, if you,
Hmm.
especially if you're into kind of history and folklore and stuff like that, it'd be great to go back and check out.
Which it'll
So
be on
feel
here for 2 weeks, but after that, it'll be on YouTube, Medium Jenny Lee.
yep.
And I'll be back Friday. I know you guys missed me Friday because I didn't do my stream. My child had a birthday, and I let him have a friend spend the night, so there was no way I could do readings with two teenage boys yelling in the background. So, um, but I will be here Friday to do my regular reading night, so I know you guys will be happy about that because I'm sure you missed it. All right. Thank you to psychic medium Joe Cunningham for coming on and telling us all about this fascinating vampire stuff and just having a in general wonderful discussion.
Yeah,
And
thanks so much for having me.
I'm going to go ahead and end the stream here, folks. Thank you for those of you who are watching, even if you were lurking. I know there was a lot of lurkers tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next month with Shayna Marie doing some Reiki information. Shayna's going to come on and talk about Reiki.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Bye.
everybody.